Hello everyone, Ross here at Teacher Toolkit. I hope you're well. Today, I'd like to talk to you about teacher workload and well-being. All the goods, the bads and the uglies. What can a school do to generally support teacher mental health and workload? For people watching elsewhere, outside of at least England, I know I've got a lot of people watching in lots of different parts, just to make sure you're all in the right place. We're looking at teacher workload and wellbeing, and I'm going to be joined by Mark Solomon shortly, the founder of Welbee. Last year, the Department for Education recently published a wellbeing charter to improve the mental health and wellbeing of teachers and support staff in our schools and colleges. Inside the charter, there are 11, and I'm just going to remind you of what these are in terms of how a school and college can make some organisational commitments to help support the workforce. Teacher workload and teacher mental health has been a passionate topic of mine for almost a decade now, and we'll unpick some of the kind of nitty-gritty research details, some of the good information that's being shared in some of our schools and colleges, as well as some of the not so good issues in some of the work that I've previously published under toxic schools. But before we get started and before I bring Mark in, let me just do some reminders. If you're watching on Twitter, Facebook or YouTube, if you're logged in, then you can leave comments and I'll post those questions onto the screen so everyone else can see them, and you can post some questions to myself or to Mark. And obviously this recording, all the slides will be shared later. But before I bring Mark in, let me just go through these 11 organisational commitments that the Department for Education published last year in their wellbeing charter. So number one is to prioritise staff mental health. Not all schools have a wellbeing policy, sadly, but hopefully yours does. Number two, give staff the support they need to take responsibility for their own and for other people's well-being. So, in your professional development, there should be many opportunities for managing mental health, things like pensions, all those different things outside of the classroom day-to-day teacher training that we receive. Point number three, give your managers access to the tools and resources that they need to support the well-being of people they line manage. So really good, effective line management and appraisal systems in place. A clear communications policy. I mentioned that word, email, a burden for us all. How do we do this better? Point five, give all staff a voice in decision-making. My research on collective teacher efficacy, or at least autonomous schools, are when all staff feel that they are part of the key decisions. Point number six, drive down any unnecessary workload. How often does your school take something away rather than just always introduce something new? Point seven, do you have a working and diverse flexible team, but also a person that leads this, a kind of champion of workload and well-being? Number eight, create a good behaviour culture. Number nine, support staff to progress in their careers. Number 10, a sub-strategy for protecting leader well-being and mental health, something that's often not addressed, I think. And there's a good reason why we always seem to have head teacher vacancies. And then the last one, hold ourselves accountable, including by measuring staff well-being. So this is the particular topic I'd like to discuss with Mark, who I'm going to bring in and introduce. Before I do that, Mark, if you just give me one moment, I'm just going to, I'll do that in a minute. I'll bring in where we've got our audience from around the world. So we've got a lot of people watching in lots of places around the world, but I'm going to bring Mark in. Mark, can I welcome you? And could you say hello to everybody watching?
Yeah, welcome to everybody. Thanks so much for attending today. Really glad to be here. And thanks, Ross, for inviting me and having me.
Mark, can I just get you to just give us a little background into your expertise, and we'll come into Welbee shortly, but just give us a little synopsis of your kind of working history.
Yeah, well, I've spent the last 12 years coaching and supporting school leaders who've been wanting to develop their culture and leadership. For the last 5 years, around asking them to put staff first. And interestingly, Welbee, which I've founded a couple of years ago, actually came out from working with 17 schools around Belfast in Northern Ireland. And the survey we use was actually being used in Ballyclare High School, clearly a school ahead of them at the time, because since 2010 to 2016, they'd actually measured and tracked the well-being of their staff every year. And it was the schools around them that asked me to get involved to help. And in many ways, that's how Welbee was created. I did grow up in a teaching household. My mum was a teacher, though I have to say that my senior leadership experience came from a completely different sector. And up until 2008, I was in retail banking, so you can all boo now. And I was retail director for Sainsbury's Bank, and kind of made this switch in 2008 to as part of the 2012 Olympics, actually, where I teamed up with David Henry, for many of you, he might be a little old, but a 1968 gold medalist. And we brought Olympians into schools and created a program to help young people effectively become an Olympian of their choice. So that's kind of how I'm in schools. And then I was drawn so much by how the difference you can make there to really stay here and support staff.
So a fascinating background. I guess your exposure into schools from those kind of sources started to increase your own interest, or at least your awareness of the pressures that teachers are under in particular.
Yes, I've been a governor as well, I should have said, for over 20 years, and in both the primary and the secondary sectors over in England, and I chaired a 13-school trust, which is more a community, a federated group of schools, and before multi-academy trust came along. So I've always been really fascinated by education, and in fact, my journey's kind of gone the opposite way to most people, because after the 2012 games, I developed a character education program, 63 lesson plans that I wrote, and I was very focused on helping young people be the best that they could be. And then I read a lot of research that showed, particularly for resilience and other skills, that after 6 months or so after you'd helped them with these skills, if they didn't practice it, they kind of lost. And then I moved to whole school development and well-being, saying, no, you've got to capture everybody together. And then sort of in 2015-16 began to realize actually the only way to get this right and deliver the best student outcomes was actually to put staff first. And although John Thompson wrote the book and claimed the title, I think I was going around with PowerPoints, put staff first before that. So well done to him on implementing it. But for me, the fastest way to get the best student attainment is by looking after staff. So that's kind of the message I go around trying to do.
So, we're here today, Mark. So we're going to put some slides up shortly and go through some of your research and insights into teacher work and well-being. Can we just begin by talking about the Department for Education's Wellbeing Charter? Give us your opinion why schools should sign up to that in particular.
Yeah, so in terms of it's a useful framework, and I'll come on to a bit more of the detail when we get going, because I've got some slides around just my suggesting which of those commitments you might want to look at first and why. Obviously, it's a voluntary charter, which you can look at as both an opportunity missed in terms of, like safeguarding, should we be putting something statutory around this to get people to really focus in on it? Because I think genuinely most leaders do want to do things about it, but many of them find it difficult to find the time to resource. But here we've got a useful framework, and the key thing is to focus in on those things that are going to make the biggest difference. Because when you look at the whole 11 commitments and go, it feels quite overwhelming, doesn't it? That, hey, I'm going to implement all these things. And of course, with no instructions, no added resource or capacity to be able to implement it. So in terms of helping people see, clearly it's a statement of intent to staff that actually you mean business, both current and future staff. It's a way of supporting retention, recruitment, attraction, all those things. But actually, it can't be a tick box. You've got to mean it, because otherwise people still see straight through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So people need it's more of the how rather than just the what and the why. But I'm going to put on the screen, Mark, the actual image of the Education Staff Wellbeing Charter. So just to remind people, or if you've not seen it before, I'll just put a reminder here at the bottom of the screen. There is the hyperlink. So if you're searching for it, short code DFE Wellbeing Charter, I'm sure you'll find it. I'll also put a link, and I'll circulate my own blog and thoughts on Wellbeing. But Mark, give us a little overview of what staff will find in here, what the 11 are that I went through at the start, and then we'll start to unpick how we can bring this to life.
Yeah, I'm just going to start. I mean, obviously, we know what we're going to talk about today, and I'm not sure where you're all in your staff wellbeing journey. And so I just want to share information on the charter and a few of the things that I've learned working with hundreds of schools. And I'm sure there's going to be things that I cover that you're going to know well or you'll already be doing. And I'm also sure there'll be practical steps for you to take away. And before I just jump into the charter, I just thought it'd be useful to share a few stats with you. I'm sure many of us have felt like this, and probably before we had even heard of COVID, because we've often been in kind of managing in crisis for a number of years. And the last 2 years have obviously added significantly to this. And it is hard to believe, isn't it, that it has been going on for so long. So I just want to share these numbers with you, and some of them you'll have seen as well. And I guess I've got to be careful today, because in the context of what we're seeing in places, like Ukraine, it perhaps puts some kind of perspective around the things we're talking about, but it doesn't change the fact that the challenges we've got and the difficulties that many staff are facing. And we're going to be talking about different references. So whilst I might not point to where the links are, I'm happy to share any of the references and links that I use today. So if we just start at the top, 33 is a well-known number. It's that percentage of new teachers leaving within the first 5 years. You'll be familiar with that. And we're also yet to see what the longer-term impact of COVID might be. And particularly as we keep seeing a number of reports talking about how half or more of staff are considering leaving, which is a figure that's largely remained unchanged from the last 5 years. We know that 8 out of the last 9 years in England, recruitment targets have been missed, and therefore recruitment retention are key challenges. And certainly the school where I'm a governor, we're constantly finding it difficult to obtain not just key teachers now, we're starting to find it difficult to recruit some support staff as well in key roles. In the 2021 Staff Wellbeing Index from Education Support, we can see that 72% of staff describe themselves as being stressed, and 44% of them citing symptoms of anxiety, and 28% saying that they're suffering from depression, which are just enormous numbers. And stress is the number one cause of long-term staff absence, and only second to minor illnesses for short-term absences. So I just want to look at what are some of the reasons behind that stress, because then when we get onto the charter, we can be thinking about some of the how-tos, what we might do. And it's often workload and working hours that's talked about most. And of course, we all know back in 2018 in England, though I know internationally, having been at the guest conference, there was a talk there, and international schools often look at this. The government introduced the workload reduction toolkit. So workload reduction has been a key focus, and I'm sure if you're like most schools I work with, you've taken action, whether that's reducing things like the number of data requests, planning, marking, or something else. Yet, even in our surveys and results in schools where staff feedback is more positive and well-being is reported as comparatively strong, workload remains high. So we know we all work in a high workload environment. So in many ways, it isn't just about how we reduce it, although, as Ross said, we surely not going to add new things without taking something away, but it's also about how it's managed. So whether staff are trained in efficient working practices and how staff think about it, because we can all work too much if we simply dictate our hours rather than choosing our hours of work and making our work fit to it, which is easier said than done. But we do need to help our staff adopt this approach. The final number, and something that Ross has been sharing, comes from the Nuffield report, which showed that 68% of teachers in England felt accountability-related stress. It's a third higher than across other countries, but even with the average being 45%, we can see that it really is how people feel about workload that's key. The consequences of the workload and not being able to deliver that accountability, as well as things like inspections that make a difference. And so building a psychologically safe place of work is so important, one where staff feel safe, can experiment and learn. And, how to do that particular thing is for another day. but we will touch on it a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to finish this particular area just by launching and talking about one other study, which was a large study by the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. And this is important for teaching because those in education, particularly in schools and colleges and maths and around the world in different schools, have chosen to work in one of the 3 most stressful occupations that are out there. And this large study by out in the US showed that those working in a high stress job have a 43% increased risk of early death. So I'll just let you kind of reflect on that for a minute. So it isn't my intention to shock, and there is better news in a minute that I'll come on to. But
it's a frightening statistic, isn't it, Mark? I guess. When I qualified a long time ago, but I knew I was entering a challenging profession. It doesn't mean that it's right or acceptable, but we know that the nature of the job is tough. I think the important point that you made is it's knowing how to manage those stresses as a school institution. School leaders buffering external accountability, Ofsted Department for Education challenges away from the body of staff and only giving them exposure to those things as and when they need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why it is so important, because if I just turn to 0%, the good news is actually the best place to be is in a high stress environment, but understanding that stress is simply part of a job and knowing how to manage it, because that actually makes you not only 0% increased risk, it actually puts you into the best category. So if you're working a high stress job, congratulations, and you know how to manage this, you can expect to live the longest life of anybody. So that's how important staff well-being is in many ways. It isn't just about today, it's the impact it can have on people's health, well-being, and way beyond obviously their teaching career. And there are also other real positives that come out, which are kind of, sit across from this in a way, because we know from research as well that teachers have a better overall life satisfaction than many other graduate careers. Yet we also know that despite this, they also talk about and face the greatest work-related stress. The final bit I'll say on this point is that the research also shows how experience of staff differs. So one thing in the Nuffield report again shows that staff are twice as likely to feel stressed if their colleagues do. So the establishment, so whether that's a school or an education, whichever education establishment you're in, and the environment they work in really does matter. And it's why we see such different scores and feedback between schools and colleges that we work with. So you can really make a difference locally, and don't just assume because the government isn't helping that you can't do your bit.
Yeah, and there's just one other thing from that Nuffield research, Mark, that I think we need more research, a longitudinal study perhaps, on how teachers evolve throughout their profession and how stress changes according to experience or when you take on a new role or increased responsibility.
It's just it's interesting because one of the filters we measure actually in terms of scores is time at school. And again, I would say from our own, we're in 320 plus schools now, only just launching before COVID, but we don't see any clear patterns yet, and it seems again to be quite local. So we see schools where new starters give much higher scores, and we also see schools where new starters also give lower scores.
Right.
We see old timers who've kind of been there again looking like they've had enough, but we also see great experience and people hanging there. So I would argue, I think you know this, it's really about the leadership and culture.
Absolutely.
That makes the difference.
On that note, Mark, we know it's not just having a full pot of tea and coffee in the staff room and those types of things to tick the well-being box. How do staff meet those 11 commitments? We've mentioned we can't do it all at once. So where would you recommend people start on?
So it's a bit like, I've just got this one, but it is a bit like building a house, really. And the key thing first is to think about putting the foundations first. So that's really about leadership behaviors and systems of support. It's about what happens every day. And so when we come on to the charter bit, it is really about the tools that managers have. It is about those senior leader protections as well, because actually, if you get those bit right and get these foundations right, other things can flow from it.
And these things become, they almost, part of the wall, so to speak. They become hidden over time, and you don't appreciate them because when they work well, you don't notice them, I suppose.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, the better your well-being, the better staff well-being measurement comes, or the better your environment is which to work, the less you have to talk about it, because really it is about what happens every day. When I walk into school that day, am I greeted well? When I go home at night and I've got a lot of work left, am I feeling about, am I okay to just leave it and I pick it up the next day? Or do I worry about, from an accountability point of view, oh my God, I haven't done things? Do I feel the pressure? Because although there is pressure from the system, the other thing from working a lot of schools, I know staff put a lot of pressure on themselves to get things done. They're often perfectionists. They really care about their pupils and students. They don't like leaving things not finished. And so part of that is about how we help staff realize, look in the mirror, have you done your best? Again, it's a conversation I often have in our results review calls with leaders about what happens typically at the end of the day. How many of your staff going home thinking about what they didn't get done today, and all the things they didn't achieve, rather than perhaps
one of my favorite lines at the moment is that some of our best teachers don't mark all their books.
Absolutely. But even if you haven't got some stuff done today, yes, I can guarantee all of you will have done an enormous amount of great things. So can I encourage you to go home thinking about what you have achieved? So with pupils, isn't it? We tend to focus in on the misbehaving ones, and we forget about the vast majority who've been brilliant all day. And it's the nature of the sector in some ways that we tend to kind of bring ourselves down to worry about all what we haven't achieved, rather than celebrating everything that we have.
Now, Mark, when I first got interested in teacher workload, there was not a lot of evidence. And I'm clutching dates here. 2010, where I really started to get interested in it, and it was very difficult to find stuff. And I know you've got a reference to a study that you're going to just put up on the slide next. What have you been discovering in your journey with teacher workload and wellbeing?
So in terms of I'll come on to those references in a minute, and I'll finish my house in a minute as well, because I think in terms of second floor. But last year, actually, we did our own 8,000 staff took a national survey with us. And I guess what it showed was that senior leaders give the lowest scores, which actually is slightly different to our surveys that we do with schools, where they tend to perform a little bit higher. And it's middle leaders that tend to give the lowest scores in the surveys that we run directly with schools. And I don't know if that's because senior leaders, sometimes when somebody's asking them anonymously about the sector, whether they perhaps are a little more unguarded when they're asked about their own school, and they feel a bit more of a loyalty to it. We also saw, actually, over COVID, up until September, October last year, we actually saw scores going up.
Right.
Well,
what kind of question, when the leaders, senior leaders and middle leaders score themselves low, what type of question is being asked?
Well, so we use the Health and Safety Executives Indicator tool, and we use that in our national survey. The reason we chose that, and we're glad that we did now, because when we get on to number 11, it is recognised by the new Wellbeing Charter. But it's the one I saw in that school in Northern Ireland, so I can't actually give myself any credit for choosing it. It was just, I guess, one of those lucky things where I saw something. It measures 35 questions, and it measures what I call the culture of a school. It's the things that leaders can do something about, and particularly senior leaders, it's demands that are placed on them where they perhaps score the lowest. Because what we see with senior leaders often is they're trying to protect the rest of their staff. So one of their things is, I come across it all the time, they'll cover duties so other people don't have to. They'll not eat lunch so other people don't have to. And whilst I understand that, it cannot be a long-term solution, because basically people just get burnt out. Yeah. So it's how we help, and a big message for boards and governors as well as senior leaders themselves is actually how do we kind of start to think of senior leaders as staff, because often it's almost like senior leaders and then they're looking after staff well-being rather than actually they're part of staff as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm quite disappointed in some ways because it's the only thing that's been called it's the only thing I saw that was called a sub-strategy. When you write something called sub, it's almost makes in my eyes it's not as important.
Not as important.
Whereas I know this should be front and centre.
Can you talk us through the evidence that you've got, Mark?
Yeah. I will just jump onto that. So the second bit I'm just going to say on this is, and why I like the house model that we've got here, which I did, is most people start in that first and second floor first because it's easier. So they'll do the treats, they'll put on a wellbeing day, they'll do some pampering, they'll do some activities, they'll put some training on. Understandable in a way because it is easier. The challenge with starting there's nothing wrong with any of those things, and actually for people that need support, who've got some mental health issues or other things, we absolutely have to support them, whether that's employee assistance schemes, direct them to the education support free helpline that everybody in over here can access for free. But it's just not, these aren't the places to start, because once I've eaten my cake, or I've had my activity, I've been pampered for a day and I turn up the following Monday, nothing's changed. So everything we do has really got to be focused on causes and change. So let me just talk about the evidence then. I'm just going to put three bits of evidence up. This was quite an old piece now, 2007 from Birkbeck College and Work Life Support. Around 800 schools overall, and it showed a statistically significant improvement in SATs and GCSE results in line with teacher self-reported staff wellbeing. The big challenge with this one, and with quite a bit of research in education, is that people can't prove a causal link. In other words, what we don't know is staff wellbeing better because student results are better, or is or does staff wellbeing better staff wellbeing improve student results? And so that's kind of a piece. Last year, the Teacher Development Trust brought out a paper which actually looked at 30 different papers, and they basically concluded the quality of teachers' working conditions has a clear, consistent relationship with student attainment, and that they're starting to see a causal impact. So again, they're both interesting. Happy to share the links to those as well for people to see. But I think we can start to see there is clear. Where I like to look and where I think there's more evidence is in business, but particularly the health sector. And that evidence from the health sector, pretty much all research in the health sector has demonstrated a causal link between staff self-reported wellbeing and multiple outcomes. So that includes things like staff absenteeism, turnover, staff cover spend, all things we can translate into education, and also patient satisfaction, infection and mortality rates. So again, things we can put into outcomes. So we can very confidently say that the higher that the hospital staff self-report their wellbeing, the better patient outcomes will be.
It's very interesting. Again, my thoughts here. I've read at least the top two on the screen. How this might be broken down by demographics, poverty, etc. That if you've got great staff wellbeing but working in a very challenging area, can you still achieve good outcomes, or are there certain things against you? Or so you mentioned that casual link and trying to unpick.
Yeah, I think, but obviously outcomes are all comparative to history, I guess, in a way. So can you push up those attainment? So those in more challenging schools, more challenging areas may not get to the level of some of those that are more privileged. But actually, compared to maybe where they were a year, 2, 3 years ago, and sort of pushing up, I think is absolutely possible and kind of proven by this. And I guess the other thing that this health research showed, the two other things that it showed, was the impact of the financial costs. And we know from both DFE's own figures and people like Askell and others that the savings can be significant. It's interesting now because less and less schools are spending perhaps on supply cover the way they did, both from a financial point of view and also because actually they can't find the supply cover.
There's not many people around available,
but obviously that has
also good.
I was going to say, but it has a different cost, doesn't it? That's not a financial one. But in the case of large secondary schools, some of these figures from our school were showing in the hundreds of thousands of pounds that were being spent, and even for smaller schools. So there's particular savings. And I think the other couple of things to say is, the other bit the research said was that the importance of monitoring employee wellbeing and how, where it was monitored, and as a result, resources were targeted at areas known to be problematic, the differences that made as well. And of course, for schools, it also helps with things for inspection, particularly Ofsted, because they're only ones who've got a leadership and management judgment that touches on staff wellbeing. But as we come out of COVID, I would have thought most of the inspection regimes are going to start to have more of a look at this important area. So,
well, we don't want to talk about Ofsted, do we? One of my favourite activities as school leader was, Investors and People offers a great model for people to follow, the Teacher Development Trust. A reminder to everyone that we're going to look at Welbee's platform shortly. And Mark, can we go into the 11 charter?
So that's absolutely.
Just before you do, Mark, just remind everyone that we're going to give away a license, a discounted license to access Mark's software. So we'll come to that at the end, but stay tuned, stay watching. And as a reminder, if you want to leave a question on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, all you need to do is add a comment, and it will come through on our screen this side, and I'll pose that question to Mark. Sorry, Mark. Let's go into the 11.
That's fine, yeah. So I'm just saying, so you're right, this is the DFA's answer to keeping more people in schools. Before we just jump on there, of course, they do two things in there as well. DFE set out their own commitments to wellbeing, and it's interesting that they talk about how they're going to build in wellbeing to the things that they do, but they kind of let themselves down slightly with the words "where appropriate" after it, which kind of makes me chuckle a bit as to thinking, well, where can it ever not be appropriate to build it in? But one challenge to people in schools is, look, they've put in writing what they're prepared to do. If they are not living up to it, and they're not at times still, then we need to shout out, hold them to account, because they've put it in writing now. So if you're on a Friday night and you get something in asking for a ridiculous response, then now you've got something to say, no, I'm not going to, and I've got some reasons and some challenge around it. And of course, Ofsted, for those of us inspected by them in England, have also set out some of their myth busting again about what you don't have to do. So again, it's worth making sure people aren't doing things that they need to do. And these are the 11 commitments that Ross talked about at the beginning. And as you say, quite a big number. So it's where to start. And I'm going to suggest that these three are the places to start. Some of you might be surprised that I haven't said number 2, and I'll come on to that for the reasons that I've kind of intimated already. But, making sure leaders have the right tools is likely to lead to the delivery of many of the others, because it is going to prioritise mental health. It is going to start to cover how they communicate, and it should give staff a greater voice and more of them as well. Protect and leading wellbeing, because it's not a sub-strategy, and we need to put it front and centre. And then measuring where you are now to celebrate strengths and focus on priorities, as well as track progress. I'm sure you're going to expect me to say that. We're a measurement company. But everything you do in schools that's important with your students, for example, you wouldn't dream of not measuring and kind of seeing how they got on. So you robustly measure and report and track the impact. And if you want to make a difference for staff in this important area, I'd say, actually, if you don't know what your current position really is, and you don't know the impact of the actions you're going to take, then you're probably not going to arrive at where you want to arrive at.
Yeah, clutching at straws and guessing in the dark, I suppose.
And the reason why I haven't put number 2 on there, that's not to say there aren't some things you should do. Mental health first aiders in school, employee assistance schemes, I've said, providing counselling and support to those who need it. But the challenge is, if you put a lot of effort in here before you've sorted out, number 3 and the tools for managers, you're going to forever be firefighting. What you really want is to create a base where your managers understand how to lead well, understand how to support people. Therefore, when you get to look at commitment 2, you're much more likely to have it sustained and embedded as part of your culture.
Mm-hmm. So really interesting points there, Mark, and thank you for identifying which ones you think you should prioritize first, I suppose, in this list of 11. Can we take it a little bit further and start to explore, you know, what well-being, what your tool can do for people?
I'll just come on to the well-being. Let me just cover just because I just want to give a little bit of value in where to focus alongside the the Wellbeing Charter. Then I'll come on to Welbee next after this slide. But this is Professor Sir Cary Cooper. You may or may not have come across him. People on the call. One of the UK's leading organisational wellbeing experts. Great cowboy name, really good. And but this is one of his quotes, and he kind of lays poor wellbeing in a way at the feet of leaders. And to a large extent, I agree. And now this isn't casting any blame at people, and it's very hard to get this bit right in the education sector, given how line management is structured. If you think about that first leadership appointment, particularly for teaching staff, because they usually continue to carry on 90 to 95% of a previous job teaching. And, so it's limited time for one-to-ones, to give support to others, and for all the leadership actions that are taken for granted in other sectors, and suddenly we're going to be asking them to do as part of the charter. That CPD for soft skills that he's talking about is rarely provided, and often when it is, it's kind of shoved into an inset day or a twilight session with very little thought about follow-up and how do we embed and build this into the school culture. And of course, this is all commitment 3 and how we help people. But the challenge is if people haven't got time, how you do it. And I just want to put forward one thought of how to look at this particularly important area. And that is really through how do you help people understand those behaviors and competencies that will make a difference. So they don't necessarily have to do more workload, but they can perhaps think about how they behave. And one way to look at it is through these competencies that came out of Goldsmiths, University of London, funded by a health and safety executive invested in people and the Chartered Institute of Personal Development. Mm-hmm. And I think they're a great self-awareness for both new leaders, but those that perhaps haven't had the CPD, not covered in things like our national qualifications either, which kind of leaves alone, I think, too much leading people, which is where well-being effectively.
So Mark, within this framework, and could you just identify one or two? How do we define soft skills?
Yeah, so in this one, it's the specific behaviours here, and then I'll come on to soft skills. So these are things like talking about people behind their backs, about not leading consistently every day, about criticising more you praise, about taking feedback yourself as personal criticism, and really a kind of list, a really good checklist of things that actually we know that if leaders behave like this, they are likely to cause stress to the people they lead. Mm-hmm. Whereas if they understand these behaviours and can deliver them well, they're likely to engage them and reduce or even prevent that stress. So there were 4 iterations of research that produced these, and they're funded by quite significant players. And interestingly, they're actually provided for free for Chartered Institute of Personnel Development, the HR functions members on their own website, but I very rarely come across people who've used them. We've built them into our toolkit as 4 self-assessment questionnaires for our things. But again, it's kind of like, yes, of course, we've got to find some time, but they're self-assessment questionnaires, and they lead to skills like empathy and trust and coaching and various things, which are probably the 3 biggest behaviors we see that make a difference for people. Can I coach people? Do I have a level of empathy, and how well am I trusted? Because of course trust is reciprocal, and if you don't trust people, they won't trust you back. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting about all these is they're all competencies that you can develop. You're not born with them. You can learn them and learn how to do them. So we're
talking about all staff, not just school leaders here.
Yeah, we are talking about all staff, but obviously we really want to start with leaders. because clearly they're the ones that are going to have the biggest impact.
Of course.
And so I start with the senior team, try and cascade that out. People see the difference. It's contagious. I mean, the biggest win, I'll tell you, but the biggest win that I've seen, and I would always encourage, is leaders catching people doing things right. You know, teachers are great at this in the classroom, but we seem to come out of the classroom and forget about it because we're also busy rushing around. Schools are great at shout outs, email, thank yous, but less good at catching people in the moment. Now, there's lots of reasons for that. Some are obvious, like people are spreading classrooms, we're timetabled, we don't get to see each other very often.
Busy people.
Absolutely. But interestingly, you know, I was a graduate trainee in the Halifax, and at the age of 23, which was 30 odd years ago, and probably more, I was actually trained, and the catchy title of this particular training was Managing by Walking About. So I was actually trained how to go out and just walk around and catch people.
Bring that title back into the workplace.
Absolutely. So let me move on and just talk a little bit about surveys and measurement and after measurement. Because obviously it's commitment 11 is, you know, use recognized tools and measure trends and progress over time. And for me, even I've said it, it is where to start, because if you don't know where you are now, it's very difficult to take the right actions. So lots of schools, probably the biggest competitor for us is do it yourself. And there's nothing wrong with do it yourself, and I'd rather you did something yourself. But if it's a financial decision, you'd be surprised how affordable things are, and getting help from a third party in terms of reducing your workload, as well as making sure you've got actionable information and that staff realize it's anonymous, so you're going to get probably more accurate information. So I would always suggest you have a look at it. For those that, for whatever reason, can't afford it to do, there is, and we'll share this, we do have some training for people, everything you ever want to know about running a staff wellbeing survey, which gives you the 14 steps you can follow yourself and things to look for. The key things that people miss out are benchmarks. Because actually, if you don't have a benchmark and you just have a set of scores, you are unlikely to focus on the right areas, because not all scores are made equal, and sometimes higher scores will be lower comparative score and vice versa. So you can end up putting lots of effort into areas that you're not going to make a big impact on, whilst ignoring some low-hanging fruit, for example. And there are obviously other things you should do before you even jump on a survey. You know, look at your school data, give you clues, you know, your retention rate, your staff absence rates. You probably all do exit interviews, but good idea to also do stay interviews. You know, let's ask staff before they leave and why they're staying in our school and how can we kind of do that. So there's lots of data you can collect before you use a recognized survey. But the beauty about a survey, and particularly if you use the same one, is you can track trends. And a lot of we've added the ability for schools now to add some of their own questions without compromising the evidence base or the tracking, because one of the challenges we saw was lots of schools do surveys, but they keep changing the questions.
Yeah, so it's difficult.
What's happening outside, and therefore you can't track.
I like the concept of a stay interview. I like that.
Yeah. It's not. I don't think it's that new, but I think it's probably something that's not particularly done. It's a bit like the same, having confidence in a line manager, isn't it? To ask the people you lead, how would you like to be led? You know, what do you like? What do you like about my style?
Yeah.
What would you change? Now, that's not me saying I'm going to change, because I might say, well, the reason I do this is this, and this is why. But it leads to a two-way conversation around leadership style. I've done a lot of work in schools in the past on psychometrics and looking and helping leaders understand that you can't behave in the same way with all your staff either, because, you know, some people are big picture thinkers, some people love the detail, and actually, if you use the same conversations with those, you'll get the best outcome potentially from one, but not the other. So as leaders, understanding different behaviours is really important. So let me just share a little bit about. Let me just finish on the chart, and then I'll come on to Welbee. So running the survey, it's not just the charter, but you'll see there from the National Foundation for Education Research that they're recommending you should do that as well. I'll leave this slide in, and I'm going to jump straight into Welbee. But
Okay.
signing up to the charter is absolutely easy. You just have to send an email with your school details to them and go, I'm signing up. I think the decision to sign up or not is the one that you need to spend a bit more time over. So in other words, you should do this if you're committed to action. Don't do it so you can put a badge on your website or to say we're part of it, because people will see through it. So this is one of those things where you have to mean it.
Building the house. I like that analogy.
Yeah, so let me just tell you a little bit about Welbee then. So we came along because I worked with these schools, and I saw that most people are ad hocly dealing with staff wellbeing. They're jumping in and out of it. They're running a survey. They don't get to then do anything with the results because they're too busy, or because they don't have the expertise in school to be able to manage it. So really, we're talking about systemizing. How do you create a view where you measure, you take action, you implement, you follow up, you embed, and then you repeat, so you can see what's happening. And whether or not you choose to sign up to the charter or not, if you want to improve the wellbeing for your staff, systemizing the approach, whether it's with us or doing it yourself, is really important. It's also important because it enables you to communicate with staff as well, because we forget that staff are quite greedy, and I don't mean that in a horrible way. If you've done something for them 6 months ago, you need to remind them you're on a journey and keep them going, saying, look, so last time we did this and this and this. Yeah. But being cyclical really helps you do that. So you can see some of the things we do. As I said, we've systemized the process. It's evidence-built survey. It comes from a government body. It's been independently evaluated. It's the Health and Safety Executive Indicator tool. It's based on the management standards, which many of you might come across from a stress risk assessment purpose. You probably come across it. It's also recognised by the Staff Wellbeing Charter, and for those inspected by them, aligns brilliantly with Ofsted's leadership. I can see that you've got
in that top right hand side, Mark. You've got it. You can break it down by support staff, middle leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So our focus is to reduce your workload. So we've got filters in there. So as well as benchmarks against schools and the Health and Safety Executive's own for cross sector, so you know what really is good or not. We provide filters both in the core platform against those 6, as well as time at school and whether people are full or part-time, because we want you to not kind of go, well, that's my results. We want you to know who to celebrate and who to focus on for impact. In our premium offer, as well as adding your own questions, you can choose your own filters. So if you're a bigger school and you want to go down to your English department, there are safeguards built in for anonymity. So it'll only report once a certain number of people in a filter take the survey. It won't kind of expose people. So heat maps kind of tell you who to focus with. And then we provide a detailed report with probably the biggest thing that schools wanted, which is recommended actions. So we're actually telling you the sorts of things that other schools have done if they've got a score similar to yours that have made a difference. And as you can see at the top right, you can track your progress in the dashboard, and you can track your progress by those filters as well, so you know how you're doing. And so when you've taken action and you repeat, you can see, well, did that action work? Do I want to do more of it? Was it a waste? We provide things like a presentation immediately to download, so you can share very quickly with staff. Because one of the biggest frustrations I have is when people do surveys and they don't share the results. That both will reduce future participation rate, but it will also lead to people thinking you've got something to hide.
Sure.
So you have to be sharing the results
within the platform. I'm sure there's an opportunity for schools to connect or to learn from each other. Is that something that the resource can offer?
So there are opportunities for them to two-way communicate with their own staff anonymously. In terms of building that wider community, we work with a lot of multi-academy trusts now, and so there's the opportunity there. I'll take your suggestion, Ross, as being a fantastic idea for us to add on. We've got a development as long as I go. We've got some really interesting things coming this year. I think we're already a market-leading product. I think by the end of this year we'll be the world's best for education. A bold statement, but I know what we've
there we go.
got coming down.
We've got a discount. People watching from Teacher Toolkit, we can. There we go. So, do you want to talk us through this, Mark? And I'm going to ask how much does it cost?
Yeah, so it's really affordable anyway. So for a smaller school, £247 plus VAT for a year subscription, which includes the survey, it includes a results review call afterwards, it includes all the filters, the benchmarks.
Someone's going to ask me, what's a small school?
So less than 200. On our website, you can see, so less than 200 pupils. We do it by pupil EdTech. The highest price is £647 for schools of £1,500 pupils or more. Yeah, the premium is obviously a little bit higher than that, about 40% higher, which adds the ability to add your own questions and filters. But because we know schools are really loving it, we have that without. You can have that for the first year. There is a second tool called Welbee Voice that you get access to, which allows you to have anonymous ongoing conversations, something we created for schools because they asked us to do that when COVID hit. They didn't want to do the big surveys. They wanted a small kind of, it's a bit like anonymous email, groups of 8 or more staff to seek feedback, etc., and a toolkit. And I guess for us, what we've gone down the route for schools, we think this is the right solution. One of the alternatives is a pulse survey, and obviously there are those out there using pulse surveys. I think affordability-wise, we're probably, if not we're definitely one of the most affordable.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, I get to see thousands and thousands of bits of software in my life as a teacher blogger, and I can reassure people watching that this is good value. So, Mark, people watching, if they're interested, can they just quote Teacher Toolkit and they can get that 40%?
Yeah, they can just quote, speak to us, quote Teacher Toolkit. I'll come back to it. Or you've got a link there which will forward to you. Anybody coming on that demo link. So if you want to see what it's about, you can book yourself a demo. 30 minutes. We don't bite. We won't force you to buy. We'll just show you how we're supporting schools and let you have a proper look at the platform as well and take you through it. We also manage the whole invitation side, so that both increases participation. So I'd love to say, look, by using us, you have no work, but we haven't quite worked that one out. But we think we massively reduce workload. You don't have to do any analysis of figures. We provide it all to you. We'll manage the invitations. The only work really is right at the front end because we upload your staff records on a spreadsheet. So
I guess it's reducing that workload straight away. And I guess building that house, that analogy that you've used, you're given. I'll quote the kind of third bullet point of the Wellbeing chart. You're given already the managers the tools and resources they need to support well-being. So I'll come back to you, Mark, in a second. For people watching, any questions in the chat box on your YouTube or Twitter, and I'll pose them to Mark on your behalf. This is your last chance. I'll put 1 or 2 links back up on the screen. There is the link for the DFE Charter. People who have signed up to get this recording, I'll circulate Mark's slides as well as the DFE Charter and my thoughts on that also. Mark, any final thoughts?
No, I think, I just encourage people to put staff first, to think about it logically, both as a staff member. Now, this doesn't mean we're not focused on pupils. It's not an either or.
Yeah,
it is the best way to deliver what you need for your pupils is to put your staff first. Intuitively, I think it's quite obvious, but the evidence backs it up, particularly that from the health sector. If you just imagine, I'm going to say that when you go to a hospital, one of the things you might want to check if you're going in for an operation is the staff well-being of those people in that hospital, because it's quite frightening to think that if it's not very good or lower, you're more likely to die. And when you start thinking about that,
that's frightening. I mean, what I've learned from this session is that I guess the need. I suppose a few years ago, I was quite nervous about the systematic process behind tracking well-being, but in an edtech world where things are quite easy to manage and give you this, in a world where we're all immersed by data, it allows you to put your resources in the right place. So I think
I just want to say, the idea of this is not to create league tables. It's not about accountability. Scores may change, and things happen in the outside world, bereavements happen in a school community, your Ofsted comes in just before you run and it could make it go higher or lower. So you cannot ignore context when you're interpreting results, and we help people do that as we're going through. So it's really important for those of you that might be in multi-academy trusts or local authorities or clusters or groups. The other thing we do is we offer a group dashboard, and we're just launching actually the ability to share those results across schools, but maintaining anonymity. So at the moment, so you can self-benchmark against other schools in your locality, but without it being a league table. The whole point to give you clues as to how you're doing, but to allow you to improve at your pace, and doing the things that you can do with your capacity, not to try and add to the accountability by going.
That kind of data would be very useful for a multi-academy trust leader in the family.
Absolutely.
I've got this slide here. I was supposed to show it at the start, but I've kept a bit of my data to the end. I just thought I'd just put up on the screen where people have signed from, so you can see there's an interest in this from people across the world from my Teacher Toolkit network. I guess if we zoom into the UK at least, because we're talking here from an English context, and I'm sure there are many people watching in international schools that are interested in this. Mark, maybe you could just give us how your software will work in an international context.
Yeah, we're just about to pilot in the US, which is quite interesting. So if anyone from the US and you're interested in piloting, let us know. We've got one district there, and we're just talking to a few others. The good news is, particularly because you can name your filters yourself, if you do happen to have some different topics or subject headings or various other bits, we can cater for those. So wherever you are in the world, we'd love to hear from you and support you. The other thing I should have mentioned as well is, look, guys, we believe in our product, so this isn't a gimmick. Nobody's ever claimed on it, but look, we offer a full money back guarantee, and we do that to take some of the risk out of it. And 85% of schools that have used us and run a second survey with us, and we've got a very high renewal rate, have seen improved scores. So we can point to things. We've for those of you who want to see some head teachers on our talk about it, they're on our website. We've got 3 or 4 case studies, both from just writing one for Wickham Abbey. We've got some
share that link actually while we're there, and we'll wrap things up. So that,
we've got some of the we've got all sorts of schools. We've got some of the top independent schools in the country. We've got some great secondary schools. We've got some grammar schools. We've got lots of primary schools. We've got infant schools. We've got a small number of colleges because we came to them a little bit later. So whatever you're whatever you're working in, if you think this is of interest, come on, reach out to us. We'd love to show you how we help.
So thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to finish with a quote from my favourite politician, Mr. Nick Gibb, who actually wrote in the foreword of the Wellbeing Charter, we want to see a sector that is free from mental health discrimination, guided by emotional intelligence and characterised by supportive and nurturing cultures. So there you go, everyone. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your time, Mark.
No, it's good. And of course, Nick's forward has now been removed and replaced by the Education Secretary in the update in November. But it was a very good quote.
It was a good quote. There you go. Right, everybody. So I hope you're well. I hope I've given you a little flavour into the benefits of Welbee, as well as the Department for Education Charter, and how your school can start to, in the words of Mark, build the house from the ground up. So I will see you soon. Mark, thank you for your time.
No, thank you very much for having me. Really enjoyed it. And thank you to everybody who's attended. I know taking a chunk of time out like this out of a day is not an easy thing. And I see that day to day talking to the schools I do. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Bye, everybody. See you soon. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.